big welcome to this, our first full session of this convention today, organised by the Stop the War Coalition. My name is Judith Orr, I'm one of the national officers of Stop the War, and I'll have the pleasure of chairing today's session. We've got a fantastic panel here, but I'll introduce each one in turn just before they speak, so that if somebody's a latecomer, they know where we are in proceedings. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go straight to our first speaker of the session, which it's a real honour to introduce our opening speaker, Michael Mansfield, KC. I mean, he is a legend, really, in the legal world, has represented victims of injustice from the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, the Stephen Lawrence family. He's somebody you want on your side if you're in trouble. So please give Michael Mansfield a really warm welcome this morning. Thank you.
Can you hear if I don't use a microphone?
No.
No? Okay. I don't know whether you can hear with a microphone. Yeah. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I will endeavour to stand up instead because it's difficult. If you don't know, you can't see everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm not. Is that better?
Yeah.
I'm really not used to this. They usually stick one in my ear, but I haven't done that one. Yes, I'm really feel very pleased that I'm able to come today. I don't live in London anymore, so I've come especially for this. And I'm aware of all the marches that take place every weekend and so on. And I can't always do as much as I used to do because I'm getting on, as you can probably tell. However, I have a close connection with Palestine, and I do just want to indicate what that connection is, because it's not publicly known, or it's not known widely why I've got this connection. And I'm going to come back to the title of the talk. And it's only 8 minutes. I've got a lot, somebody's going to pull my jacket or throw something at me when I'm getting near to that time. However, and it's important because I'm at a crossroads myself as a lawyer, having spent all of my working life, so it's well over 50 years, working for the sort of cases you heard about, but also in relation to Palestine. And the connection I've got there is that I sound like John Cleese in a shoebox, when I was a boy. But when I was a boy, my father was in the British Army, First World War, part of General Allenby's army, whose task was to free up Palestine. And whilst my father was out there, of course, the politicians back here were endeavouring to undermine all these efforts by the Balfour Agreement, which you all know about. He became, fortunately not mortally, but thought to be mortally wounded, and was left for dead. Fortunately, he didn't die. He came back. He was disabled for the rest of his life. However, I was brought up in an environment in which he was highly critical of the way in which the whole matter of the mandate and all the rest was handled. And so I had a particular, as it were, benchmark to live up to. So I had that connection. And then many, many years later, I was asked to sit on the Russell Tribunal as a judge for 4 years. The original idea was one of Bertrand Russell's, but this one was sponsored by people in Belgium, and we travelled the world, ending up at the United Nations with the ability to speak to the United Nations about the recognition of Palestine as a state. I spoke on that occasion. I'm not saying we changed it at that point, but they got observer status within about a month of being there. So we've made all sorts of inroads that are important. However, my problem now is, what's happened to what was being essentially underpinned by the Russell Tribunal, by the need then to shame international institutions and systems of law into doing something about what was happening then, never mind now. And the concern of those of us who got together at that time was to ensure that the, if you like, the norms of international law, international humanitarian law, war crimes and so on, were adhered to, because they weren't being adhered to, they weren't being listened to. However, little did we know that we were almost whistling in the dark, but not entirely. But the situation over the last 12 months has become intolerable, you know that. I haven't come just to sort of say how it's doom and gloom and doom and gloom. There is a lot of doom and gloom, but there are things you can do that are extremely important. And I, as a lawyer, would want to help with any of the initiatives. I'll come to them in a moment. And they're to do with protest, they're to do with about freedom of speech, they're to do with the ability to discuss in a legitimate forum just like this what the problems are. But what has happened, you know, namely the ICC issues arrest warrants. Well, sorry, they haven't. They've applied to issue arrest warrants, and they haven't been issued month after month. And just at the point at which something might have been going to happen, allegations are made against Karim Khan, who I know quite well, who's the chief prosecutor. Very interesting, and of course it's all gone quiet. The ICJ, approached by the South African delegation to advise about genocide and so on, taking forever. By the time they get round to an adjudication, a final adjudication as opposed to an interim one, on genocide, it will have happened to such an extent that the latest, it's not incredible, not something that none of you anticipated, that Gaza is being made uninhabitable. And that is, if you like, the thin end of the genocide wedge. But you know, we're having to wait for that. However, in between, something else has happened, which actually, in my view, has changed the arena quite a lot. It shouldn't have taken this, but it gets overlooked. But it is, the, if you like, the underpinning I've just been talking about for meetings like today, when people say, well, what can we do? The ICJ came up with another advisory opinion in July. Now, if you know it, forgive me for repeating it, because I think it needs to be repeated. What the court advised, and it's a decision of the court, it's a very high-ranking court. Not only has it got respectability, but obviously it's admired by a lot of people throughout the world. They are independent, and their judgment in July was what they said before in a judgment called The Wall in 2004. They said the same before, but it hadn't been taken any notice of it. It's run underneath everything. It's even more important than what's happening in Gaza. It is that, surprise, surprise, 75 years has been an unlawful occupation, which includes Gaza. Now that's not just an empty phrase, because it entitles you as an individual citizen of the world, and the universal jurisdiction we're talking about in terms of international courts, it entitles you to be able to say, what is the result of that? The result of that is any kind of collusion with a state that has committed a crime, an international crime. And there's no question, but that's what the unlawful occupation means. That it is a crime, and you, as another citizen, have to do all within your power. It's called omne erges, and it's a kind of phrase, a Latin phrase that lawyers found about. But what it means is essentially all those people who are parties to the various conventions, and particularly to the International Court, have an obligation, and they're citizens, whether you happen to be a member of the organisation or not. You have an obligation. Everyone sitting here has an obligation not... what has happened is, I'm not going to read it out, it takes too long a time, but following the ICJ...
Mike!
Sorry, I won't read it out because I'll have to turn the pages down. I drop the microphone and then my trousers fall down. So, the sequence is unenviable. However, I brought it with me, but there are 37 independent rapporteurs and working parties based in Geneva that, as it were, do the research and groundwork for the United Nations and for other bodies like the ICJ. And what they've said in this particular document is UN experts warn international order is on a knife's edge. Well, I agree it is, because if it goes this what have I got, 1 more minute? You know what I'm going to say, and that is, we now have pariah states, we now have leaders, and it isn't restricted to Israel. There are many other countries in the world who feel that the rule of law, which is what the Russell Tribunal was all about, is an empty vessel. They can do what they like, and might is right. Now we have to turn that around by ensuring that where we live, where we work, this document, if you look at it, you can Google it easily, gives you 14 different ways in which you can, as it were, bring pressure to bear on those states in the world that are acting unlawfully, and obviously Israel is one that's been found to do that. And they're all actions that you're capable of being part of if you want. So there's no need to leave here today and say, well, you know, we don't know, and I dare say there'll be some questions later so I can follow it up. Have I overrun?
If you stop now, you're fine.
Okay.